Just in terms of Ukraine, my concern is that when you equate these two powers at the negotiating table, it does seem to diminish the fact that Russia was the aggressor and having been there 5 times since the war started, stood at Bucha at the mass grave and heard accounts of rape and murder and the kidnapping of kids. I just don't hear the administration talking about holding Putin accountable for these things as part of these discussions. And finally recognizing that Putin doesn't seem to have any reason to negotiate in good faith because he has, what, 4 to 6 times the manpower? He treats his troops like cannon fodder. And I think he probably recognized this is an administration that will do another supplemental. So what in the world are we doing to hold him accountable and to actually force him into negotiating in good faith? And again, not rewarding him with de facto land that he currently occupies. And what is it? We're punishing him that he can't have additional land? So what is it we are doing to actually hold him accountable and force him to negotiate in good faith beyond really stern tweets?
Yeah,
Russia's role as the aggressor in Ukraine is undeniable, and this single fact shapes the entire narrative of the conflict. From the very beginning, Moscow launched an invasion that was not provoked by Ukraine, but driven by its own strategic and political ambitions. The evidence of this aggression is not abstract. It is written in the stories of ordinary people whose lives have been destroyed by violence. Mass graves discovered in Ukrainian towns reveal the scale of atrocities committed, each one a chilling reminder that behind every number is a name, a face, a family torn apart. Survivors have spoken about the horrors of rape, about loved ones executed without reason, and about children stolen from their homes, transported away in a deliberate attempt to erase identities and futures. These are not the accidental tragedies of war, but systematic acts meant to break the spirit of a nation. What makes this fact so important is that it challenges any attempt to treat the war as though it were a simple disagreement between two equal sides. Ukraine did not choose this war. It was forced upon them. When the aggressor is so clearly identified, the responsibility of the international community should be equally clear to ensure accountability. Yet, time and again, the language of diplomacy risks diluting this truth. Talking about negotiations without acknowledging Russia's role as the invader creates a dangerous false balance, as though both sides share equal blame.
Yeah, on the second point, those are the details that would have to be worked out in any negotiation. And as I said, he'll have to make concessions, and so will the Ukrainian side. I don't know what those are. We're not going to predetermine what those are. That's why we want him to enter into direct negotiations. We honestly continue to believe we're open to any peace deal, but we think it's very difficult to enter peace negotiations without a ceasefire because something blows up somewhere, some attack happens in the interim, and the negotiations fall apart. On your first question, listen, I sense, and I think we all do, what you're arguing here, okay, about the imbalance in the relationship, by who's the invasion, things of that nature. But the bottom line is this war has been going on for 3 years, and there was no end in sight. And the only way you can end it is you got to be able to bring both sides to the table. And we feel like the president, we know the president was in a unique position to be able to bring both sides to a table and be able to talk to both sides. It may ultimately not work out. It may ultimately not work out, but we have to at least try to make it work. And I think it's the same position, for example, the Vatican has adopted. There's a lot of pressure on the Vatican to condemn the Russians for their, but the way the Vatican has viewed it is unless we're able to talk to both sides, we have no hope whatsoever of trying to force a negotiation.
There's no impetus.
Putin has little reason to negotiate in good faith, and this reality shapes the dangerous imbalance at the heart of the Ukraine conflict. Russia's advantage in sheer manpower gives the Kremlin confidence that time is on its side. With estimates showing that Russia has 4 to 6 times the number of soldiers compared to Ukraine, Moscow treats its troops as expendable resources, sacrificing them in waves on the battlefield with little regard for human life. This cold calculation means that Russia can continue pressing forward even at enormous human cost, while Ukraine, fighting for its very existence, must carefully ration its limited resources and manpower. When one side believes it can simply outlast the other, genuine negotiations become almost impossible. The deeper problem lies in how this imbalance affects Putin's mindset. A leader who sees soldiers as cannon fodder does not value compromise. Instead, he calculates strength in terms of how much suffering he can absorb and how much longer he can fight. Every time the international community provides Ukraine with aid or support, Putin assumes another supplemental package will follow, reinforcing his belief that he can stretch out the conflict until fatigue sets in among Ukraine's allies. To him, stalling becomes a strategy. He does not need to negotiate honestly if he believes his opponents will eventually tire, lose focus, or accept a flawed peace simply to stop the bleeding. This perspective undermines every effort toward dialogue.
Force a
If
negotiation.
there's no impetus on Putin to do anything, he won't do anything, and he will be rewarded. This is more like Chamberlain than someone who's trying to win a Nobel Peace Prize. Chamberlain didn't win a Nobel Peace Prize conceding this and saying, well, this war could be going on for a long time. FDR didn't say, this war's been going on a long time. You know, we're not going to engage and involve. We're just going to see if both sides can work this out. Aggressors like a tyrant like Putin aren't going to listen to goodwill.
Well, I understand. I think the goal here is to reach a ceasefire so they can negotiate a broader deal that's fair and frankly sustainable. If it's an unsustainable peace, meaning if it's an unfair, unbalanced peace, it won't be sustainable. And our goal is to get them to that point. I hope we're successful because the alternative is more people will die.
I agree.
The debate between accountability and diplomacy is one of the most difficult and important aspects of the war in Ukraine because it forces the world to choose between principles and pragmatism. On one hand, there is a clear moral responsibility to hold Putin accountable for the invasion, the atrocities committed, and the suffering caused. On the other hand, there is the pressing need to stop the bloodshed as quickly as possible, which often requires diplomacy, negotiation, and compromise. These two goals, justice and peace, do not always align easily, and that tension has created divisions not only within Ukraine, but also among global leaders and institutions. Accountability demands recognition of Russia's role as the aggressor and punishment for the crimes committed during the war. Mass graves, abductions of children, indiscriminate bombings, and the deliberate targeting of civilians cannot simply be brushed aside in the name of peace. If those responsible for such actions are allowed to escape justice, it sets a dangerous precedent for the entire world. Aggressors everywhere will believe they can commit atrocities and still be welcomed back to the negotiating table without consequences. For Ukrainians who have lost their homes, families, and futures, the idea of making concessions without justice feels like betrayal. Accountability in their eyes is not just about punishing Putin. It is about ensuring that their suffering is not dismissed as the price of political compromise. Diplomacy, however, is the tool that has historically ended wars even when justice seemed impossible.